Okay, recording has started. Okay, so welcome to the August Division of Adult Education monthly webinar. Um, so first, and I had not mentioned this previously, but first I wanted to give you an update on the monitoring review that we had in Pennsylvania. OCTAE, the Pennsylvania Department, I'm sorry, the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, which oversees adult education nationally, the WIOA Title II activities. They monitored us from, um, sorry, I need to go to the correct slide, from August 5th through 7th. So it was the week right after the kickoff. It was a virtual monitoring, and they targeted our module one, or their module one, which is performance accountability. And so what they did was they looked at our related policies and guidelines around data collection, data reporting, data usage. So, assessment policies, the data collection system. So they looked at, Michael did a demonstration of our data collection system, showed them how you all entered different types of data, um, how our system is designed to meet the data collection requirements. We showed them the manual and glossary. They looked at data use, which in Pennsylvania is, at the state level, we give you the access template. They also met with some local programs. So I want to thank Literacy Pittsburgh, Lancaster Lebanon IU 13, and its Literacy Pittsburgh and its subgrantee Goodwill of Southwestern Pennsylvania, Lancaster Lebanon IU 13 and its subgrantee, the Literacy Council of Lancaster Lebanon, and Reading Area Community College and its subgrantee, the Literacy Council of Reading Berks. They were in fact selected by OCTAE to be the local programs that OCTAE met with. So thank you all for preparing for that and taking time out of your days to meet with them. And they, the OCTAE, they were not monitoring the local programs, but they were talking to the local programs to kind of triangulate and find out what the performance accountability experience is from the local agency perspective. Discussing the challenges associated with having e-data down for a period of time and things like that. And then they also looked at our data reporting, how we, the protocols that we use to submit our federal reporting. So that's kind of what they looked at over the couple days that they monitored us. And the results, and it's for those of you who have been monitored by our office, the process is very similar. They have what they call an exit interview, what we call the presentation of findings, and they gave us a noteworthy practice. And our official noteworthy practice is they recognized the wonderful work that Michael and Steve from the MIS eData Tech Project provide to the local programs, both in being able to address data entry and especially in being able to use the access template. So congratulations to Michael and Steve for their wonderful work with us, and it was definitely recognized by OCTAE through that monitoring. Something else that they mentioned kind of at multiple times throughout the monitoring that was very positive is that as a state, Pennsylvania is doing well in collecting the barriers to employment data. Those are those items on the intake form. Everyone has to select the English language learner basic skills. But those are the things like if they're migrant workers, if they're single parents, if they're low income, previously justice involved, homeless, foster youth, all of those. And They said Pennsylvania does a better job than many states in collecting those. So I wanted to thank you and those agencies who are doing a good job collecting that data and reporting that data, because it was definitely recognized by Octay. And something to understand about those barriers to employment, those are actually used as part of a statistical adjustment model that Octay applies to our data when they are determining if Pennsylvania is meeting its performance targets. And that is especially applied to the employment related indicators, which we'll look at briefly. So, those are all barriers to employment. And so if our participants have barriers to employment, they put that information into this statistical adjustment model, and it kind of says, well, okay, Pennsylvania is serving a lot of individuals who have barriers to employment, so that means it's more challenging for them to meet their employment targets. So it really does help us. And we actually do fairly well when it comes to the employment indicators for federal reporting. We did have one finding, which was not related to anything at the local level. It was just related to the protocol that we use to calculate our credential attainment indicator. And there was a group of individuals that we were not including in our denominator. And it was specifically those individuals who moved into ABE levels 5 and 6 during their participation in the programs. So we were only including those people who had an entry level of ABE levels 5 and 6. We have to include everyone. So that was our finding, and we will work on fixing that. And then they had a recommendation that we kind of look at our data system, analyze it, and consider whether or not we might want to move to something else. So that's the results of our monitoring. Okay, so I know today I wanted to focus on looking at the agency performance and what those spreadsheets mean and how we look at agency performance. But first, I want to quickly review the federal indicators to kind of set the stage for discussing agency performance indicators, to kind of help you recognize the similarities and differences between what we report as a state to the federal office and then what we as a state kind of evaluate you on at an agency level. So we talked a lot about measurable skill gain on the first day of the kickoff, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but measurable skill gain is the indicator that looks at student outcomes while they are participating in the program, and we report that for the program year. So that's a July 1 to June 30th reporting period. And these are the various ways that students can show measurable skill gain at the federal level. So educational functioning level gain based on pre-post testing, new based on transition to post-secondary education, whether they exit the adult ed program or not, based on passing the high school equivalency subtest, which is new as of June 11th. They can show measurable skill gain by earning a high school equivalency credential. And then there are a couple options for specifically for students who are in IET or workplace literacy classes. So at the federal level, we have an overall credential attainment indicator. It is exit-based, which means we only look at individuals, participants who, after they have exited the adult education program, or in the post-secondary case, the post-secondary as well. So the credential attainment cohort has two components to it, and outcomes have two components. There's secondary credential attainment and post-secondary credential attainment. The post-secondary credential portion of the cohort for Title II adult education is individuals who are participating in both adult education and post-secondary education at the same time, and who exit both adult education and post-secondary education during the reporting period. So for Pennsylvania's purposes right now, we really only include those individuals who are in integrated education and training programs that lead to a post-secondary credential, because those are the individuals that we know when they exit post-secondary education. It's possible that you have individuals in your programs who are also in some kind of post-secondary education. You may know that, you may not know that. But the other thing is they may not exit post-secondary education. They might be working with you at the beginning of their post-secondary experience, but then they remain in the post-secondary education after they finish up with adult education, and we wouldn't include them. So that portion for us is pretty small. The secondary credential cohort, and this is where we had our finding, it includes individuals who enter without a high school diploma or its equivalent. So they started the adult ed program without that credential, and they are enrolled in a secondary education program at or above the 9th grade level, which in Pennsylvania, we just say they are in ABE levels 5 or 6, and that is at any time while in the program. So they might enter, when they are assessed as a pretest, they might be at levels 5 or 6, or they might start at level 3 or 4, but then you post-test them and they move into 5 or 6. We will need to include them in the cohort. It does not matter whether or not they have actually taken any or all of the high school equivalency tests. That is not one of the criteria for being included in the cohort. They are simply included if they did not have a high school diploma when they entered the program, and if at any point during participation they were at ABE's level 5 or 6, and then they exit the program. They're expected to earn a credential within a year. In order to consider them a success for federal reporting purposes, they also, in addition to earning that high school equivalency, have to be employed or in post-secondary education or training within that year. And that's, again, these are the requirements for the federal level for our reporting. And finally, the last 3 federal indicators are all employment-based. They are second quarter after exit, the median wage for those employed in the second quarter after exit, and the fourth quarter employment in the fourth quarter after exit. They include all participants who have exited. And this is whether those individuals are in the labor force and whether or not they have provided a Social Security number to us. So everyone who exits is put in the employment indicator denominator. And then we see if they were employed in the second quarter after exit, in the fourth quarter after exit, and if they were employed in the second quarter after exit, we report on their median wage. Which is literally the median wage as the statistician takes the wages of all the individuals who were employed in the second quarter after exit and picks the median one, picks the middle one. So that's the median wage. And this is the one set of indicators where Pennsylvania actually does quite well. We have consistently met our targets, and we are actually in the top quartile. Unlike measurable skill gains and credential attainment, in which we are quite low. Okay, and then just a couple items around data that you enter into eData that can impact our federal performance. The first is the barriers to employment, which I mentioned earlier, that identifying barriers to employment in eData does support the statistical adjustment model that the feds use, and can help acknowledge some of the challenges that our students face in gaining employment. Another item that we really haven't discussed with you a lot, but it did come up in the monitoring, is that there are certain individuals who we can exclude from the denominator if they exited adult education for a particular reason that would make it impossible for them to get the exit-based outcomes, or the measurable skill gains. And we haven't talked about this a lot. Some of you entered it for some of your students, but we haven't really asked you to make sure that you do this when you know. But it can make a difference for our federal outcomes. So the 4 criteria, or the 4 reasons for exiting, what we call in eData reasons for leaving. These 4 items, if a student has this as their reason for leaving the program, and they remain exited or they're officially exited, which means that they don't return within 90 days, they can be excluded from the cohort. So one is their call to active military duty, which we have not had in eData. We will be adding that. I don't think that is a very common one for adult education students, simply because the requirements to be in the military often our students haven't achieved the level of education or the ability to pass the exams required for military duty, but we may have some. So called to active military duty, deceased, health issues or medical treatment that prevent them from returning to the program within 90 days, and then they became incarcerated in a correctional facility. So moving forward, if you know why the student has exited the program, please put in a reason for leaving. And if it happens to be one of these 4, then it's even more helpful if you put it in. Of course, we don't want you to make up reasons. We don't want you to put in a reason that's not accurate. And of course, we know a lot of students just kind of disappear and you don't actually know their reason for leaving. We understand that. But if you do know the reason that they've left your program, it is helpful to us for you to enter that information. And I'm sorry, I have not been checking if there are any questions.
There's no questions in the chat, Amanda.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Okay, so going from federal to agency performance. We as a state are not required under Title II to impose exactly the same performance indicators on our grantees as we have to report. My understanding is that's actually different from Title I. I don't know about Title III, but my understanding is that L&I has to evaluate the local workforce areas based on the same performance indicators and the same criteria that we as a state report on. We don't have to do that. We can kind of choose our own. So we have chosen to establish indicators, cohorts, and targets that we believe will kind of find a balance between supporting the state in meeting our targets as required by the federal government, while also providing useful feedback to you as a local program. That is there are a couple reasons for that. The federal indicators are common across all of the titles. And for example, measurable skill gain kind of takes almost everything that we do as part of our services and lumps everything together into a single measurable skill gain outcome. And it doesn't allow you to see the nuances of what you do at various levels of students, educational functioning levels and such. The other challenge with the federal reporting is that their timeframes for reporting can have a significant lag. For example, the credential attainment outcome, when we do our reporting for this October and we're reporting on credential attainment, we will be reporting on students who exited adult education in calendar year 2023. No, 2022, I apologize. So in October 2024, for credential attainment and fourth quarter employment, we're actually going to be looking at people who were last in our program sometime between January and December of 2022. We don't know that that's particularly useful for you at the local level to look at people who have been out of your programs for up to 2.5 years. So that's why we've kind of come up with versions of the outcomes that we think are a bit more important and more accurately reflect the impact that you potentially can have for your students. The other thing we do not do is we don't look at periods of participation. So at the federal level, a student has to have an outcome for every period of participation. So if a student has 3 periods of participation, they actually have to show 3 measurable skill gains. We look at their employment the second quarter after each one of those exits and so on. We have chosen not to look at periods of participation. We just look at the program year. And we do have 2 key policies that focus specifically on the performance indicator. We have policy C100, which is the Adult Education and Family Literacy Standards. A performance standards policy, which establishes the targets that we expect you to meet. And then policy C135 defines the cohorts for state and federal indicators. As I indicated at the kickoff, that policy C135 with a lot of the changes that have been happening at the federal level, we're going to really need to look at that policy and update it. So that one, the one that is on the website right now, is appropriate if you're looking at prior years' performance, but we need to update it for 24, 25 and forward. So, agency performance spreadsheets are on our website, on the PDE website. Right now, there are performance spreadsheets from 2018-19 through 21-22. The 22-23 ones will be posted shortly. One of the challenges with the agency performance is that up until now, they've been very delayed. You really haven't gotten them until the late winter, spring after the end of the program year. We are working on trying to get that to happen more quickly. Heather Cecil in the division is working to get that data out. We hope to have the 2023-24 enrollment and EFL gain data posted to the Adult Education Resources website for your review relatively soon, like within the next couple of weeks. The high school equivalency attainment post-secondary outcomes will take a little bit longer, and the employment always takes a while because we have to wait until we can get the UC data for the appropriate period. But we do hope to have the enrollment and the EFL gain up. Now, through 23-24, the EFL gain will be the pre-post testing EFL gain. We'll consider looking at the new EFL gain options moving forward, but for 23-24, kind of the official EFL gain outcomes will be based on pre-post testing. It sounds like somebody may not be muted, so if you could all double check and make sure you're muted. Got some background noise there. Okay, so this is the Pennsylvania Department of Education webpage. And I just wanted to kind of show you how you can get to the various documents. Many of you already know this, but some of you are still new. Yeah, if everyone can double check your cameras and your microphones and make sure your cameras are turned off and your microphone is muted. Thank you. And it's possible that this web page is going to change soon. That's very common with new administration. So things may look different in the future. But for right now, this is our landing page for the adult basic and family literacy education. You can go to administrative documents, the guidelines and the policies. You can see we've got the C100 adult education and family literacy performance standards, C135, the cohorts for primary indicators of performance. Here's the policy. As I said at the kickoff, we have updated the targets. We had left the targets kind of at the old higher levels, and we have lowered them a bit. So here are the moving forward for 24-25. Here are our new targets for the agencies. And then if you just, as reference, here are our federal targets for 24-25 and 25-26. And going back to administrative documents, we have the performance data. And this is where you can find the performance data. So let me go. Okay. So for agency performance, we have looked, rather than having one overarching measurable skill gain, we have continued to look at EFL gain by entry level, except for ABE level 6, because through 23-24, the EFL gain was based on pre-post testing, and there is no you can't post test out of ABE level 6, so we never had targets for that. So up until now, the EFL gain has based on pre-post testing. Before 22-23, we were actually still using kind of the older policy of the student had to show an EFL gain on the assessment that was used to place them in their EFL. So it was for the subject area with the lowest EFL. Beginning with 22-23, we started using the new NRS possibility, which is as long as the person shows an EFL gain on any of the assessments, it is considered an EFL gain for them. So if somebody places at ABE level 2 on a math assessment and ABE level 3 on a reading assessment, and then when they're post-tested, they remain at level 2 on math, but they move up to level 4 in reading, that counts as an EFL gain for that student. And it counts as a measurable skill gain for the student at the federal level. So on the spreadsheets that we have posted to the website showing agency performance, we have 3 sections. There's the overall EFL gain section, there's the ABE levels 1 through 5 section, and ESL levels 1 through 6. And let's see. Here we go. Can folks see that relatively well? I've tried to get it as big as possible. Yes, okay. So on the spreadsheet, and this is real data, but these are not real agencies, obviously, right? So in the overall EFL gain section, this dark gray column is actually your performance, the actual overall EFL gain that the agency has. But we provide some additional data to give you context for how you got to that. So for example, ABC Adult Education Program had, and this is an example for the Adult Basic Education 064 students. And as a reminder, for those of you who have more than one type of grant with the division, if you have a family literacy grant and the adult is part of a family that has met family literacy enrollment, they are included in the family literacy grant. If they're in a combination of the adult education 231 or 259 grants, the grant in which they have the most hours is the one in which they are reported. So ABC Adult Education Program had a total of 482 students that entered at either ABE levels 1 through 5 or ESL levels 1 through 6. So this is not going to necessarily match the agency enrollment because it excludes students whose entry level was level 6. This column is the number of these students that had a post-test in the system. This is not necessarily they showed a gain. This isn't indicating whether they showed a gain or not. This is just showing whether or not they had a post-test. So this particular agency, 80% of the students who were in an ABE, I'm sorry, 80% of the students who enrolled in the program at levels other than ABE level 6 had a post-test, so they could potentially show a gain. And this is the number of them who actually showed an EFL gain based on pre-post testing, and their overall EFL gain was 56%. Then, and these I think are pretty straightforward, for each one of the educational functioning levels, the entry levels, we provide the data. We provide the overall performance for that EFL. For that educational functioning level, the number of students who had a gain and the number of students who entered. So this column here is the denominator, this column here is the numerator, and this is the outcome. So this particular agency had 2 people enter at level 1, and both of those individuals showed an EFL gain, so their performance in this particular level was 100%. In this case, they had 77 students who enrolled at ABE level 4. 33 of them showed a gain, so their overall EFL for level 4 was 43%. So this can be useful for you to kind of see where are you maybe having the greatest success with pre-post testing? Are there particular educational functioning levels where your students seem to struggle to show EFL gains versus others? Just some data there for you. And then we have, the ESL ones. And for all of them, we tell you what the target was for that particular EFL gain. So hopefully I'm not making anyone too dizzy scrolling. Are there any questions about this particular spreadsheet? Nope. Then we also post spreadsheets. So as you can see, we have the educational functioning level gain spreadsheet, and we also post one about the follow-up outcome performance measures. Oops. And for agency performance, that spreadsheet includes your enrollment numbers, and then for agency performance, the indicators that we have at the state is high school equivalency credential attainment. And for that indicator, we include in the denominator those students who have completed a full battery of a high school equivalency test. We include students whether they have a social security number in the system or not, because that's not necessary to do the data match. So this, for agency performance, we don't look at what that person's entry level was. We don't look at whether or not they have a high school diploma or not. We just say, did they, after they started in adult education, did they complete a battery of a high school equivalency test? The reason we do that is if you don't complete the battery, you can't pass the test, right? So why put someone in there if there was just no opportunity for them to earn the credential? So what we're saying is, let's look at the people who took the full battery, potentially could have earned the credential, and did they earn the credential or not? Again, that's very different from the federal level, where they're saying if somebody came in and they didn't have a high school diploma, and at some point they were in levels 5 or 6, and then they left your program, did they get the high school equivalency? Whether they took the test or not, doesn't matter. So we're just looking at those individuals who actually completed the battery to see if they earned the credential or not. For employment, we have chosen to only look at those individuals who are employed in the second quarter after exit. That is due to the fairly significant lag in the amount of time that employers have to report their wage data to L&I. So if you have someone who, will look at 23, 24, if they exited your adult ed program in May of 2024, the second quarter after exit would be October through December of 2024. And employers have until May 31st of 2025 to report the employment data for the October through December quarter. So we really can't do a data match for even the second quarter after exit until next April. And so if we tried to do the fourth quarter after exit, we'd be looking at people a year and a half to 2 years later. So that's why we've chosen to do just the employed in the second quarter after exit. And then for those individuals, we also look at the median wage in that quarter. One key way that the denominator is different for agency performance than what we report at the federal level is that we only include those individuals who have a valid SSN. I think some people put in ITNs, but basically those individuals who have a valid SSN in eData. We do not include people who do not have valid SSNs in the system. Now, if you are an agency who has not entered SSN significant, you are negatively impacting our federal reporting outcomes. And so we may have conversations with you about why you don't have SSNs. We recognize that no one is required to provide an SSN. We ask them and we hope they will, but they're not required to provide an SSN in order to participate in WIOA activities. So you can't require it. So I recognize that. Two, I recognize that we have students coming into the programs who don't have social security numbers for a variety of reasons. And of course, there are people who just, they don't want to give out their social security number, which is understandable given all the messages that come around protecting your identity and trying to avoid identity theft. So we recognize that you won't have social security numbers for all of your students. Um, we don't expect 100%.
Amanda,
Yes.
there is, if you wanted to go back to the previous slide, there is a question, in the chat. Are individuals who indicate they are not in the labor force included in the employment denominator?
Yes.
Okay. And that was the only question in the
Okay.
chat.
Yeah, we chose to include that so we aligned more closely with what we have to report at the federal level. Then the last outcome that we have at the state level is something we carried over from the Workforce Investment Act. Under the Workforce Investment Act, adult education had a federal indicator of enrollment or transition to post-secondary education or training after exiting adult education. And we chose to keep this as we moved into WIOA with a couple differences. So under the Workforce Investment Act, we had to include everyone who had a high school diploma at entry into the program in this cohort after they exited, even if the high school diploma was from a foreign country. So if when we were reporting on this at the federal level under WIA, you might have somebody who, had a master's degree from their native country. They came here as a refugee. They don't speak any English. They're in your ESL program, and then they had to exit because of employment reasons. And we still had to include them in the transition to post-secondary education or training. So we do not do that. The individuals that we include in the denominator for the placement in post-secondary education or training is if they have a U.S. secondary credential at entry into the adult education program, they have a non-U.S. secondary credential, and they are in ABE levels at entry. They earn the high school equivalency while in the program, and then after earning the high school equivalency, they remain in your program for an additional 12 or more hours. So it seems like they had a goal other than just to earn the high school equivalency. Or if they're enrolled in a class that is designed for transition to post-secondary education. Those are the individuals we include in the denominator for that. And then we use a data match with the National Student Clearinghouse or the adult post-secondary education enrollment verification forms that you submit for determining the outcomes. And then something that we have done is look at outcomes per enrolled adult. What that means is we take the total number of outcomes that your students have achieved, and we divide by the number of participants. And as clarification, if you have one participant who has multiple outcomes, we include all of those outcomes in that total. So, if you have one student who showed an educational functioning level gain and they were employed in the second quarter after exit, that individual had 2 outcomes. If you have another individual who didn't have any outcomes, the average between them, 2 of them would have been 1 outcome per participant. So I will bring up that spreadsheet. Okay, so this is the other performance spreadsheet that gets posted to the Department of Education website. The first section is around your enrollment. So the first column, pretty clearly, this is what your agency was contracted to serve in the program year. This is the number of individuals that were in your program, had 12 plus hours in your 064 grant. And for those of you with multiple grants who had the majority of their hours in the 064 grant, so they count towards the adult ed grant. And then this is your enrollment percentage. Of course, the target is always 100%. So in this case, we had, 3 agencies exceed their contracted enrollment. We had 1 agency come quite close, and then we had another agency who seemed to be struggling with meeting their contracted enrollment. There are another 2 columns that just are for information, which is the total number of hours that these students achieved in the 064 grant, and then just kind of shows your average hours per student. It's just a piece of information there. We don't have any targets. We don't look at that and, say this agency is doing poorly and this agency is doing well. We recognize there are different levels of intensity, things like that. So this is just kind of information there for you. And then this is the number of these, so the number of students in column D who met exit criteria, which means that they stopped attending your classes for 90 days or more. And so these are the students who are potentially in the follow-up outcomes because these are the exit-based indicators. I think the rest of the columns are pretty straightforward. For the obtain high school equivalency credential. So here, column K is the number of individuals who were in the cohort. So in this agency, there were 36 students of the, there were 36 of the 110 students who exited, who completed a battery of tests. And 25 of them earned the high school equivalency. So the HSE achievement, 69%. Of the people who exited, 54 of them completed a battery of tests, 53 of them passed the test, 98%. Go over here to employed in the second quarter after exit. 50, 39. Actually, you know what? I may, Mary, I may need to double check on the answer to my question. The answer to that question about do we exclude people who were not in the labor force? We may. I'll have to double check with the statistician on that one.
Okay.
Because the differences between those are pretty significant. So check. And the median wage is just the median wage. Placement in post-secondary education or training, again, the denominator, numerator, performance. And then outcomes per enrolled student. So here, for example, ABC Adult Education Program had a total of 118 outcomes for all of their students, all of their participants, so individuals with 12 plus hours. So there was an average of 0.85 outcomes per student. Those 118 outcomes were achieved by 69 students. So clearly, many of their students got more than one outcome. And then this would be, how many of the students who were enrolled in your program actually met one or more outcomes. So in a couple of the agencies, it looks like, actually a lot of the students who had success had a lot of success, and then there were a number of students who didn't have any success. Are there any questions about that spreadsheet? I think one thing that you may want to look at, especially when you're maybe talking to stakeholders about the impact of your program, our when you look at the individuals who, and probably this is those individuals who are in the labor force. Of course, when you're talking to your legislators, you probably don't want to say who are allowed to work in the country, but you can just say, of the people in our programs who want to get a job across the board, 3/4 of them are employed in the second quarter after exit, and they're earning a reasonable amount of money. This is, in a quarter. So that is some data that you might be able to collect, that looks a little bit better than our federal level data, because our federal level data includes everyone, regardless of whether or not they're interested in employment or not. And our numbers include folks who are retired, includes stay-at-home parents. It includes people who might be here with family members who are international employees, or international students, the family and their family members who are attending our classes. So there are a lot of reasons that individuals in our programs may not be employed after they exit, because it's not a goal of theirs. Whereas this one really kind of looks at those individuals who are interested in that. And I will double check on, with our statistician, on whether or not we exclude people or not in the workforce. I'll double check on that. Are there any questions, thoughts, comments? That is it. If no one has any, there aren't any thoughts or comments, clarification that's needed. Oh, there was one thing that I wanted to mention, because it came up at the kickoff. Someone had submitted a question about whether or not the division could give agencies credit for students showing point gains on assessments, recognizing students showing point gains versus EFL gains. There are a couple of reasons the answer is no. The first is that is not something that we can report as an EFL gain at the federal level. I think they're looking at ways that they could possibly look at that. Part of the problem is determining what kind of point gain is actually statistically significant enough to be a true gain versus one that could just potentially happen by luck. So there's that involved, but it's also really, point gains on an assessment is not something we can report as measurable skill gain, and we're trying to align our outcomes as closely as we can with what will support our measurable skill gain outcomes.
Amanda, there is one question in the chat.
Okay.
How often does the Octave monitoring take place?
Not very often. This was the first time we were monitored since 2010. So my understanding is we were one of the last states to be monitored under the new version of the law.
And there are no other questions.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. I hope that was useful. As always, if you have any questions, you would like more detail about performance, accountability, please review the policies. You can contact your advisors. We always have discussions about questions that come in so that we can make sure we're providing good feedback. So thank you all. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the summer. Take care. I will stop recording now.
Thank you.